Redbird Reboot Podcast. Are you ready to get rebooted, Cardinals fans? He settles down, at least in the zone, and does not stop running.
Blake Murphy.
This is the identity for the Arizona Cardinals.
The run defense is just horrendous, and it's been horrendous for the Cardinals for a long time.
And Marcos Labrada.
He's going to bring over his philosophy. It should make it better.
Present the hottest NFL podcast from the country's hottest state.
He should be turning around the logo.
Actually, some breaking news we can cover here. This popped up just about, 6 minutes ago.
It's Redbird Reboot.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans. Welcome into the Redbird Reboot Podcast. We've got your co-host and your other co-host here. Got Marcos Labrada, a.k.a. at Pancake Soul over there, and I'm at Blake Murphy 7. Available for you guys on X/Twitter. And Marcos, we didn't get to the schedule release late last week. We've had a lot going on, whether it was a family, work, health, but we would not neglect a chance until it's too late to talk about the Arizona Cardinals and make some predictions for the first time for their 2025 season. How are you doing as we get started tonight on a interesting night with quite a bit going on in the NBA playoffs? Not as much outside of some owners' meetings and some stuff in the NFL, but there's always plenty, of course, to be able to talk about if you follow the National Football League and, like we do, follow the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah, I'm doing well tonight and whatnot, and I'm just not really paying attention to the NBA playoffs right now, mostly because of the Suns. I got a whole, probably an essay to write about the Phoenix Suns and the disappointment and what led to that, but that's not what we're here for. So I try to avoid, anything basketball related for the moment. But I'm doing really well. I'm still pretty happy about the draft, when the players that we went ahead and have gone. And obviously the free agency was really good.
Now, I think one of the things that we can also talk about, at least that we've seen some improvement, has been in the Cardinals schedule releases. So this year, heard a little bit of wind from most of what we could say is Mark Dalton giving some news to Ian Rappaport saying that, hey, don't sleep on Arizona's release this year. I think in hindsight, what we've seen is it did a unique schedule release with a song being rapped out. Some of the players were featured. There were some other ones that were just kind of funny, unique. One got taken down out of being offensive. One was simply just Allen Iverson. The biggest takeaway, of course, is never actually how the schedule gets released, but how it lines up. And this is something where, like we say, you go in every year, what seems to be a tough game in week one ends up sometimes not being that tough by the time you get to the opening startup. Other times it can be flipped where you end up having to kind of go against a team that nobody thought would be in this spot in the fourth quarter. And then later in the season, what seemed to be a sure playoff contender is out of it by then. I wanted to have some of the thoughts at least. But first of all, do you think that we really got what we wanted in this Cardinals schedule this year, just at first glance, for what we were hoping for and maybe realistically expecting this season?
I can see some teams right here that should be easy, not so much easy wins, but at least easier wins for us. I'm looking at New Orleans kind of as the first game of the season that could be hey, we could really separate ourselves from what people's expectations are if we go ahead and start out strong. We have Carolina. Now Carolina, for some reason, we just cannot beat them, but I see Tennessee, Indianapolis, and I see Jacksonville there. And those are the ones where I think to myself, those are the must-win games. You're gonna play your obviously your division, and you're gonna have a hard time trying to beat it. And obviously Dallas, for some reason we have their number. So I see some games that are gonna be pivotal, just like it was last time we made our prediction.
No, I agree. I think one of the things I always like to do too, as far as looking at context, and this will be just a great quick example, I think, of looking at where we were at last year with the schedule release. So in 2024, let me pull it up there for those of you who are watching at least live. Appreciate you guys. Last year, we looked at the opening schedule. The first thing that stood out was Cardinals could be starting out 0-3 and have a 1-4 potential start, with that first win being against the Commanders. Hey, guess what? That take ended up being right, but the teams were wrong. We ended up actually seeing the Cardinals take on and destroy the Los Angeles Rams week 2 at home and get blown out at home by Washington, while holding the Bills in Detroit pretty close overall. Ended up being one-score games for the most part by the end of it. And then we got to see the Cardinals kind of go back and forth a little bit, at least, with They were able to win at San Francisco close, get blown out at Green Bay, win close against the Chargers and Dolphins, and then had some blowout victories, at least with a softer part of the schedule. They then had a predictable, tough finish, and as we saw for the most part, some of those games actually ended up being relatively close, but in the end, they were not able to kind of get those last couple of wins to get to that 10-win season that I think some of us had predicted they could. They finished at about 9-8. What we saw, at least as far as last year, Marcos, we were thinking, hey, you got Sam Darnold with the Vikings. You've got, Aaron Rodgers is healthy for the Jets. The Bears, a lot of people had wondered, could they be a playoff team with that defense and a lot of their offensive additions, or at least be a tougher out? Same with the Dolphins being a playoff team. What we kind of saw was that some predictions were very, very correct. Some predictions, such as Washington going all the way to the NFC Championship game, ended up in hindsight feeling like we were very, very off. I'm thinking the Cardinals at home would get their first win of the season there. I think it's kind of interesting when you look at that and look at our schedule. The things that stand out to me, first of all, are you get 2 televised games. Both are accurately televised. We can say it's not an ESPN Plus sort of game. But we've got an awesome, I think, opening setup for the Arizona Cardinals for their season this year. Real quick, let's go ahead and just say a little shout out to some of the guys who are going to be popping in with our YouTube channel. I say hi to AZ Jace. Thanks for being able to tune in here, as well as Nick Meitner, just wanting to talk about some big momentum wins in the beginning. Thanks so much. And then Sarah Cazell as well. Hello, Sarah. Good to see you stopping by as well. Love to be able to go ahead and talk some sports for you guys here on a Wednesday evening. Let's get right into it, Marcos. Week 1 is a game against New Orleans. Week 2, you play against the Carolina Panthers. This is going to be a road game. Week 3, the San Francisco 49ers at home. You then have a road game on Thursday Night Football, I believe, at this would be the Seattle Seahawks. Actually, I should say these are flipped around. So this would be a home game against Seattle, a home game against Carolina, home against the Tennessee Titans, who had the number 1 pick, and with Cam Ward. The October 12th game is going to be against the Indianapolis Colts. Shout out at least to Colts fans. Their owner, Jim Irsay, did pass away earlier today, at least in his sleep, it sounds like. So thoughts and prayers and condolences out to him and his family.
Yeah, condolences.
We can also look, at least, of course, at a big rematch against Green Bay. This will be at home this time at State Farm Stadium. Then, of course, you have a Week 8 bye week. So you're not talking about a super late bye week. You also don't have a Week 4 or Week 5 bye week. So pretty well placed. A Dallas Cowboys game, November 3rd. And this is something interesting. I always like to look at what are the teams that you play in advance ahead of who you get. So the Cardinals are going to be going in off of their bye week and then playing Monday night to get a little bit extra rest, followed by a road game in Seattle on short rest the following Sunday. The Dallas Cowboys that week are going to be coming off a game against the Denver Broncos defense on the road. So that's one of those things I think we can highlight or talk about there, but that's really interesting to see. You also then can finish out the schedule with a home game against San Francisco, home against the Jaguars, Travis Hunter coming to town, along with new offense from Liam Cohen, Trevor Lawrence, Brian Thomas Jr. You're playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on the road. That's yet another Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield matchup. Kyler is actually undefeated in those so far whenever they've played Baker Mayfield, interestingly enough. You've got a home game against the LA Rams, and that's the first time you play the Rams. So you don't play the Rams until December, and you play them twice over the last 5 weeks of the season. You then have a road game against the Houston Texans. You finish out the home season against the Atlanta Falcons. We'll see how that's going with Michael Penix, at least, and that staff this year. But they're edge rushers that they drafted. And then a tough finish on the road against Cincinnati to be determined. And on the road against the Rams, you're probably going to see the, I will say, what's it called? Fiesta Bowl, which we... every single year, they seem to kind of figure out how is the field going to be played on, national championship back and forth with 2 road finishes this year. Doesn't seem like that's going to be an issue. Cardinals will be done at State Farm Stadium on December 21st. And Marcos, we have ourselves a schedule. Do we have some predictions, positive or negative? The first thing I think we want to start off and talk a little bit about is the front half and the back half seem to be probably the biggest difference from the, I would say, where you see the wins coming, where you could see the losses coming, and that's kind of how it was last year, I think, as well.
I think more of the wins are the ones I see coming are early in the season. It's obviously for two reasons. One, we do well at the beginning of the season and we kind of don't finish strong. But the teams that I see in the first half, there are definitely some winnable games. We should be able to exit out that with at least a winning record by maybe one or two games over 500. But the rest of that, like that schedule, kind of scares me because you have some teams that have made the playoffs that are going to be hard. You have Tampa Bay, Los Angeles, Houston, and Atlanta's coming up at the very least. I'm not sure how good they are. Cincinnati had a down year, but we know that the Bengals are the Bengals. They put a whipping on us, and you also finish out with the Rams and stuff. So the only thing that I see in the later part of the schedule that makes me feel pretty good is Jacksonville and obviously San Francisco at the time. So that's what I see in the later part. That's why the later part scares me. But at the beginning, I do see some wins that the Cardinals should have.
Yeah, you go and open on the road at New Orleans, and if we want to take a look at least at seeing how New Orleans is stacked up their depth chart right now, they've got a rookie in Tyler Schuff and Spencer Rattler. We don't know if they're going to be acquiring a quarterback, making a move. Kirk Cousins, so far from what we see, there hasn't been any team that's really brought him into the building. That's a team that's been getting older and just saw Derek Carr retire. This is one of those places of where you're opening on the road. It's going to be probably a decent test, but also this is the factor that I think we can say is you should be able to come out with knowing the fact that the Saints drafted a new tackle because their last draft pick has just not worked out how they managed in Trevor Penning, and either a rookie quarterback or a fifth-round pick in Spencer Rattler, who did not win a game with the Saints when he played last season. They may not be the worst team in football, but they have an opportunity to be. And what this reminds me a little bit of, Marcos, is you think of an aging team, adds a second-round pick at least in the offseason, has a quarterback competition scheduled, has some definite talent, but there's a lot of question marks there. The Saints have a chance, I think, to be one of those teams, kind of like the 2012 Arizona Cardinals, depending on how good their quarterback situation is. Maybe they roll off like an early win or two. Surprise. We got to see that happen last year with Clint Kubiak with the system that he brought. And then we kind of saw things just caught up with them, and they ended up falling all the way down into being a top 10 selecting draft pick. To be able to follow that up with a Carolina team that has a rookie receiver and Tetairoa McMillan, one thing we've seen when it comes to rookie receivers, Marcos, is they can take a little bit to figure things out sometimes as rookies. Sometimes it takes a week. Sometimes things go across pretty well. I think of week 2, Marvin Harrison Jr. coming into town and basically lighting up the Rams for that week when a lot of people had written him off after week 1. You're going to go on the road to San Francisco and see how healthy that team is. They've recently handed out some major contracts, paying George Kittle, paying Fred Warner, paying Brock Purdy on what I think a lot of fans have said is a unique deal, because while it gives the Niners some flexibility, they're also kind of tying their future directly to Brock Purdy. And a lot of people have wondered, is that going to essentially be the kind of guy that you can see advance your team forward? Or is it going to be more of like a couple of years down the road, Kittle retires, Fred Warner's off. Could that be a Jimmy Garoppolo type of guy at least, depending? And I think he's a bit better of a quarterback, but that is going to be an interesting first road test. And then, of course, you've got a quick game at Seattle. Fortunately, the Cardinals are at home. First time they've been on Thursday Night Football in a few years, thankfully. This is probably, like we would say, Marcos, as far as the schedule for a start, you get 2 division games, but you also get 2 games, one on the road and one at home. I think that what's going to be really interesting for this is if you go into this schedule and you start off and say, hey, we're going to start out 2-2 to open up this schedule. I think a lot of fans would prefer, obviously, 4-0 or 3-1, but I don't think that 2-2 would be a bad start, depending on if you are able to put a wall up on the teams you expect and maybe steal a close win or so against one of either San Francisco on the road or Carolina or Seattle at home.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we should actually try to see if we can aim for like 3-1, because New Orleans, I know that they are probably going to be a good matchup for us that we can win. Carolina, that's going to be the question mark for me. So you may be right about the 2-2 record, because Carolina, for some reason, no matter how bad they are, don't seem to beat them for whatever reason. For whatever reason it could be. San Francisco should be a win, and Seattle, until they beat them, I will trust them. But for now, since we don't know if we can beat Seattle, I'm not going to mark that as a win.
Yeah, and then following up with that, we've got a little bit of what I'd say is a softer part of the schedule. Depending on how the Seahawks do, we are not sure what that offense is going to look like. We've seen Clint Kubiak's offense do some work last year, but with a new quarterback, having DK Metcalf shipped off, there's going to be some intrigue, I think, there to see how good that team is. You have the Tennessee Titans with a rookie quarterback. You get him early in the season. I think of how when Kyler Murray, you look at him in the Cardinals season, he didn't really come across as that passing quarterback until week 6 against the worst pass defense in the Atlanta Falcons. Previous to that, we had seen some flashes back and forth. We'd seen some struggles as well. We're also seeing another young quarterback and Daniel Jones in Indianapolis. This is another road game. And then, like you said, the Green Bay Packers game. This is one of those that I think is probably in the best placement as far as if there's a time to play the Packers. You get them at home, not having to go on the road to Lambeau, and you know that there's a bye week coming. And I think while you could say, all right, players are just going to be looking ahead to the bye, like they won't have to worry about it, you've got Dallas on the other side of that bye in a nationally televised game. I don't think this is as likely a trap game versus, hey, if you got to go ahead and lay out an extra hit or two for a player or tackle somebody, knowing you get an extra week off, that's one of those things I hope would be the case. We'll have to see what Jonathan Cannon can get, because at that Dallas game, for the most part, you've now gone from playing some non-playoff teams and some of division opponents to two teams expected to be in the thick of it in Green Bay and Dallas, and then you are at the halfway point of your season.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tennessee and Indianapolis, I believe we're going to, obviously, we have a good chance of being able to beat Tennessee. Like you said, starting, quarterback, rookie quarterback, more of a pocket passer type of quarterback that has really good touch, but he's got to figure things out, just like you mentioned. And Indianapolis, we don't know who's going to start for that team, if it's going to be AR-15. And if it is AR-15, is he going to take a step back or is he going to take a step forward? Because people have been writing him off because of this the season he just had. Green Bay, that's going to have to be a very important game to be able to circle. I want to give him that game. As bad as I wanted to give him that game, we did get beat by them, and it wasn't even close. And obviously, we got the bye week. We can go undefeated in the bye week. Everybody goes undefeated in the bye week. And Dallas, for some reason, we just know that we do good, and it's going to be away. So I think I could just mark that as a win for now.
Yeah, most Cardinals fans, I think we can say at this point, just taking a look at the Dallas Cowboys, Kyler Murray has been undefeated whenever he has played in the Jerry Dome. What's funny is the Cardinals have essentially beaten Dallas since, I think it's like something crazy going back to like I want to say it's like the 2010 season when John Skelton came in. Like the Cardinals have just owned Dallas for whatever reason. Even 2023, Kyler Murray's not even
Christmas
starting.
Day.
It's at Dallas. Yeah, that was right. That was the Christmas Day game. Jay Feely, I think, kicked a game-winning field goal, at least in that one. Gosh, the Cardinals still beat the Cowboys with Josh Dobbs. Like, it just feels like this is one of those teams that, for whatever reason, is just not a great matchup for the Cowboys with the way that Arizona is able to run the ball. That's one of the places where most Cardinals fans have said that could be a win. I think that for right now, that's going to be really interesting, because if the Cardinals have put some momentum building in, if they get a win on Thursday Night Football at home against Seattle and can follow that up with a win against Dallas, and their season seems to be going pretty well, that could lead into some potential flex games or some more national spotlight later in the season, similar to what we saw last year when the Cardinals were at a time first in their division. And then we kind of got to see when they played the Seahawks, they were not able to get past their defensive line and Geno Smith twice. Speaking of the Seahawks, that is the next team we're looking at on the road. You have, as far as travel and early time games for the most part, there's not that many. You take a look at least at how it stacks up. The only game that really stands out here as far as an early time game to me in the second half of the season is Tampa. It's going to be probably 8 a.m. Arizona time by that point. You want to take a look then at the games afterwards with San Francisco and Jacksonville at home. You're probably looking as the last easy stretch, depending on how things go, because you get to play home against the Rams. The Rams are again expected to either contend for or win the division this year. That defense with young players, plus adding, I believe, a wide receiver in
Adams.
Yeah, Devontae Adams
Davante
and a
Adams.
future 2021 Jaguars pick. So if the Cardinals beat the Jaguars, guess what? That's just going to help out the Rams. I don't think that we need to concern ourselves with what the Rams are going to do with their draft pick, because there's a team similar to that in Houston where we saw how having Houston's first round pick, sometimes it works out exactly how it's planned, other times it does not. That's going to be an early game on the road, but it's not going to be as early as Tampa Bay. We used to see the Cardinals, we would write off if it's an early East Coast game, whether it's the Panthers, Falcons, whoever it was, they would write that up as a loss. We'll see at least if the team's able to overcome some of that because their late season finish, you got that matchup with Atlanta. That defense needed some pass rushing help. They needed some help at least on getting some guys healthy on offense, I think, is the biggest area. We'll get to see if they are rolling at that point with Michael Penix or if this is a team that's struggling. And then two of the best closing teams in the NFL, Los Angeles Rams and Cincinnati Bengals, you get them both. This is kind of the do or die moment because I think, depending on where you're at in this point of the schedule, these two games could either cement you as a contender if you're able to either have a competitive game or split, or we would exit the season having a lot of questions if the Cardinals are unable to capture a postseason berth and it falls to one or two games specifically down the stretch that they are not able to win. Let's go ahead, Marcos, while we're going over some of this and talk a little bit about what we wanted in terms of the Cardinals and their national televised show. So, Cardinals have not had a lot of nationally televised games. We finally got some last year. Technically, we got one. And we also got, in a standalone bracket, a game on the Saturday against the Rams for what we had hoped would be the division title. Turns out the Panthers and the Seattle Seahawks ended that dream for the Cardinals. Do you think this was good that the Cardinals got two nationally televised games with a chance for a third? Are people selling the Cardinals a little bit short where we probably should have seen about 3 or so televised games nationally, that they're going to be back up there? Is this a spot where we probably should have just, people keep the Cardinals sleeping for the most part, give them another one national televised game, doubt them at your own risk sort of thing that we saw pay off with a second game last year? I think this is about fair. I think you'd like to have had a third game, but I think that Cincinnati game and the Rams game at the end of the season does provide some flex opportunity.
Yeah, it does, especially since both those teams are they're playoff contenders. So the Los Angeles Rams, depending on if it's like a fight for their division, just like how the NFC North played out with Minnesota and Detroit, where you couldn't have predicted that those two teams were going into that last game fighting for the division and having the same record. So let's just play a hypothetical here, and the Cardinals are, fighting for the division. Maybe there's like a game left, or maybe they have the same record as the Los Angeles Rams. That's definitely going to be a flex situation with the Rams, but that should be the goal. The goal should be not to only win the division, but at least have that game flexed out. Because either way, if you're down on the division or you're way up on the division, it doesn't matter at that point. They're not going to do anything with it. And as you know, the national media doesn't really pay attention to a team like the Cardinals. They consider it a small market, so they're thinking to themselves, okay, you know what? You guys look like a pretty decent or pretty good team. There might be some buzz around you. Definitely going to give you some primetime games. We'll give you a Thursday night slot. We'll give you a Monday night slot. And for the most part, the Cardinals have always been in that range of just having 1-1. For a small market team, that's pretty good. Because at the very least, depending on how well you're doing the schedule, this always happens. When the Cardinals would have a winning, record, and there's teams out there that are getting like slots they shouldn't be deserving, they go and flex out the Cardinals. So it's just all depending on what the Cardinals do. Obviously, they'll get some games flex if they are having a win record or are competing for the top.
Yep. All right. So let's go now and say with the home games this year, we knew the home opponents. The away games, we already knew the opponents. The timing of how it all works out. What I think is really interesting about the home games this year is the home games are pretty much all winnable games. The Cardinals have beaten the Seahawks, since Geno Smith came to town. So that's why that's an interesting game to be able to look at. But teams like the Tennessee Titans, teams like the San Francisco 49ers, the Jacksonville Jaguars, even the LA Rams last year. And then when the Cardinals last played the Atlanta Falcons, they did win that game. That was the Kyler Murray late heave up to Trey McBride game. The home schedule, well, I think we can say that we didn't say during the Cliff Kingsbury years, should be a home field advantage throughout the season. The games that stand out, of course, are Seattle and Green Bay and San Francisco and the Rams, which means it's your division, but out of schedule, they play a third place schedule. I think they get some favorable home games, depending on how the Carolina Panthers do look this season. I think the biggest difference from this year and last year, Marcos, is when they played the Panthers last year, that defense was just shot. They lost James Conner for the game. They weren't able to effectively be able to run. They put up 30 points, but the defense gave up 38 on the ground. Having a stronger defensive line gives me some, I think, hope that this could be a much more favorable home schedule. The away games, let's not sugarcoat it. Some of these are tough. These get a few ones that we could see for some easier wins in the early season, such as New Orleans. Indianapolis is one that's going to be a big question mark. Some people are already writing the Dallas game as a win. Your away games late in the season, all were in the playoffs last year. Tampa Bay, Houston, Cincinnati, Rams. That's difficult. You're going to have to, I think, be able to win at least one or two of those games on the road, be able to clean up what you're doing or try to steal one if you're going to be a competitive and playoff team this year, as I think we can say we're expecting the Cardinals to be. You get some home games here. You don't get road advantage like you were hoping for. At some point, you're going to have to probably say if this team is going to jump into being a playoff contender, they're going to have to win one or two of those tough road games, something that we saw they struggled to do late in the season last year. This is one of those places where I think it was pointed out by one of our viewers for the most part, which is Nick Meitner said, it's kind of the same as last year, but this year we get like the Packers at home. You get a team like the Seahawks early at home. Just some of those places, at least, that you're going to see is where I think this team's mettle is going to be really tested, is going to be down the stretch. And that goes into a lot of questions that people have about Kyler Murray. The draft was all in defense. The acquisitions in the offseason were mostly keeping some of the current guys, hoping that guys take a step forward. If we see what a lot of the narrative has been in Kyler Murray, where he starts out hot, Cardinals get off to a great hot start. Later, as the season goes along, guys get hurt, they get banged up, they kind of fade down the stretch. This is the opportunity here where you can either prove a lot of people wrong in one fell swoop or kind of confirm that narrative that's there about you and slide into a spot where there's going to be a lot of questions following this season. And I think in that case, Marcos, it may not set up as favorably for the Cardinals or for Kyler Murray, but it does, I think, favorably set up for us to actually know what are we working with here at quarterback when it comes to not just winning games here and the now and getting to the playoffs, but over the next 3 to 4 years up through 2026, 2027, maybe even 2028 as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously down the stretch is where we've been having our issues. Now, the big narrative that we have, carried on is that I'm not sure if it was a Cardinals narrative, but definitely with Kyler Murray on the team. And at first, this was a Cliff Kingsbury narrative. Falls down the stretch, don't finish strong. Later on, the schedule doesn't matter if it becomes easier, if it's like a tenable schedule. If you're set up to win, the Cardinals seem to just lose out. And at the end of the season, they end up disappointing. So when Cliff Kingsbury left, we were expecting for that narrative to be done because the whole tie between that was that this offense was, started out strong because the teams didn't know how to, defend it. And then obviously with tape and with film, they're going to learn where the, what the philosophy is, what kind of things to attack on defense for them, and or what defenses or DCs can take away and whatnot. And with Kyler Murray now being the quarterback solely, even if it's in the new offensive system, with Drew Petzing, that narrative is still staying. It's still stuck throughout the year. So this would be the one time, even though it's a gauntlet later in the year, this is going to be the one time to be able to prove in 2025 whether or not we made the right decision and extended him, whether or not we're going to keep extending him because he does want to retire Cardinal. He did say so as much. And whether, what are we going to do next year? Are we going to prepare for offense if this team falters again? Are we going to look for quarterback? What are we going to do? So those are the big question marks. And as I mentioned, later on in the season, that does not look good. But we will know more about that team passing the halfway point. We're going to know what we have. And if we have a winning record, then maybe that carries on with momentum. But if we're losing, and we have a losing record, and we're down 2 games below 500 and whatnot, that's not going to bode well for him
No, I
or for the
agree
team.
at least for that. It's not going to bode well for Kyler, wouldn't bode well for a lot of areas. There's probably enough faith, at least, that we'll see how the defense performs, because that's going to be one of the other cases we've seen is if we take a look at Arizona over the past couple of, I want to say, seasons for where they've been, they went from being essentially a bottom-dwelling team to last year, they actually kind of were able to pick up somewhat. Last year, they ended up finishing 13th overall in Pro Football Focus and those rankings. And a lot of it was built off of not necessarily their offense and defense being outstanding, but being good enough on the defensive side of the ball that with their offense and their run game, they were able to be very effective, finishing as a top 6 overall offense. On defense, their issue was against the run, stopping the run, and at times the pass. They did not have a good defensive line, lost some of their linemen. The linebackers at least weren't special. This is where they've made a lot of additions, and I think if you can take a look at the Cardinals being 23rd last year, if you can leap up into the top 10 of some of those rankings, that's, I think, would be your overall goal. And to me, that would start with you need a good old-fashioned showdown where you can blow the New Orleans Saints out of the building. This was a bad Saints team last year. 27th overall grades. They were 23rd on offense. They were 30th on defense. So you're talking about a bottom 3 defense. Marcus, where did the first 2 Saints picks go in this last year's draft for 30th on defense?
I don't even remember, to be honest with you.
It was
Who did they
offensive
draft?
tackle and quarterback. They didn't take a defensive
I
player
see.
early. And when you take a look at the Saints last year, we've talked about this as maybe not an easy one, but we're probably expecting a double-digit sort of win. Cardinals are already the favorites. The Saints rolled out and destroyed some teams on offense in the first 2 weeks and then promptly went on to lose 7 straight games in a row. They're able to kind of bring some stuff back when Derek Carr came back. He was actually out for some of those games for Spencer Rattler. He's now since retired. Rattler did not win a game as the starter last year. It's him or a rookie quarterback. This is a Saints team, Marcos, that I think you need to go in and say, we've got a strong offense with our rushing attack. They're not a good defense. And when it comes to the offensive side of the ball, we've got a much better defensive line than last year. We're going to start going through some of these week by week with a little peeking at the teams, but I think for week 1 at New Orleans, we want to be able to categorize this as a win for Arizona. Do you have the Cardinals winning week 1 as we shift into our game by game, week by week predictions looking at this schedule for this year?
Oh, yes, I absolutely. I see this as the win, and depending on how the win goes, if we win a close one, then it's not going to look good for us. We're going to kind of put our hands on our head like, oh, okay, we're kind of worried. But if it's a big win, like I hope it is, then you know what? We have a lot of good feelings about this team.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to go. We also have now a home game that the Arizona Cardinals then go against the Carolina Panthers. Not expected to be a dominant team. The Cardinals, preseason wise, were considered, I think it was like 6th lowest in terms of the NFC of making the playoffs. Panthers are one of the teams lower than them. They had a 5-12 record. The biggest issue for them was the defensive side of the ball. What's interesting about this, too, is this is a rough defense. They missed a lot of guys due to injury. They traded away Brian Burns. Derek Brown was out hurt. They really, as far as the offseason went, when you're taking a look at the Panthers roster, they wanted to really cement a little bit more on the offensive side of the ball. So they went out and drafted Tetero McMillan, and were really looking, I think at least, to try to be able to get a defensive guy in the next round. They traded up and were able to get, I believe, Princely Umanameli, the edge rusher, in that second round. Cardinals ended up, I think it was 3rd round, if I remember correctly, was where they traded up for him. The Panthers' 2nd round pick, if I remember correctly, I believe that one still belonged. No, that was Nick Scourton. Nick Scourton, who was someone the Cardinals were interested at one point in the 2nd round. So they took the wide receiver and then took 2 defensive ends for the most part. This is a home game, like you said. We've seen struggles that have happened before. I think what's interesting in this matchup is this is probably going to be the first time that we're going to say, what is the impact of having 2 really highly paid guards on the Panthers, having a good defensive line that the Cardinals have retooled, and how does that outside matchup look for Arizona's defensive backs against Tetero McMillan, Adam Thielen, and a guy like a Jacob Coker, because they didn't have a lot of good receivers overall. It's part of why in 2024 they were the 32nd overall team ranked with how bad that defense was. The offense wasn't that good. But like you said, Marcos, this is one of those teams we've had problems with. I think that the Cardinals' defensive improvement, should we see things play out, I think their defense is still a step ahead of the Panthers. And I think on the offensive side, if you were getting them later in the season versus early in the season, I would think that maybe their passing game could be a little bit more coordinated. What do you think? Do you have this as a win or a loss for Arizona?
Well, I really want to put this down as a win, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. The only issue is the Panthers, for some reason, it doesn't matter what the circumstances, they either win a game, they had no business winning, and they just make our team just look like we're like they make us look like we're just a bottom feeding team for some reason. But I'm putting this as a win because it should be a win.
Yeah, it feels like that's kind of one of those places where this is where you got to change the narrative. We've seen teams knock off teams that they struggle with for a long period of time. A good example was, I think, to a few years back, Cardinals couldn't beat Sean McVay. They finally were able to knock them off. I've got this as a win as well. Week 3, we're moving on to the San Francisco 49ers. This is a team that last year really underachieved. They were a top 5 offense. Despite not having Christian McCaffrey in their lineup, despite not having a lot of guys healthy, losing Brandon Ayuk, they still finished pretty much top 10, everything except for their defensive side of the ball. They could not stop the run last year. They go out, draft a bunch of run stuffers. I think this is the question, Marcos, is this team seems to be getting older as far as with George Kittle, Fred Warner, Trent Williams. As far as the draft picks go, they're going to be trusting a Ricky Pearsall to step up a bit. And then I believe as far as with the Niners for their draft class this year, they actually went and took who was the guy in the first? Williams, Michael Williams.
Yeah.
They took him as an edge rusher to pair across from Nick Bosa, seeing as how Bosa's health can fluctuate. They added some linebackers, defensive tackles. It was very much like how the Cardinals went and had their drafting everybody on defense. The biggest thing I think between the two is the Niners didn't spend a lot in the offseason on defense. They did keep some of their guys and really trusted that draft. The question I have, Marcos, is the Cardinals defense good enough now to stop the San Francisco 49ers offense? I think it could depend on how healthy is Christian McCaffrey going to be and how early do those defensive playmakers make a difference, because I think on the Niners side, they're really trusting some of those rookies to shore things up. Whereas on the Cardinals side, you're probably going to see some of those rookies, maybe outside of Will Johnson, their first overall pick they had in Walter Nolan. They're probably going to be having a lot more veteran guys that are going to match up. Niners let go of Debo. He's not maybe not fully cooked, but it seems like he's kind of starting to be medium well. Is a good way to put it. Last year, he just did not look like the same player. He's looked like that for 2 years in a row. I think that if the Niners come back and are able to have a decent enough run game, it's going to probably be one of those cases where we're either going to say, hey, this is the Niners getting back to form. But I think with how they played the Niners last year, Niners fans are thinking we underachieved, we lost a close game, sure, we can do better. This is one of those games where I think the Cardinals have a shot to either split one with the Niners or win one on the road. As far as it goes to getting off to, here would be a 3-0 start if they win. Do you think that they'll get off to a 3-0 start, Marcos?
Yeah, they definitely they're set up to be able to start off 3-0. That's why the first part of the season, or the first half of the season, seems so, like, structure wise, it seems so well for the Cardinals to come out of it at least a couple games over 500, if not more. And you're talking about two teams that are kind of in the same page when it comes to like stopping the run. They did the same thing that we did. But I trust our team, our offense, and our defense to outdo them this early in the season. So I would say this is a definite win.
Yeah, this is one of the ones that I think I have this one as kind of an edge game for the most part, of either could be a win, could be a loss. My guess of what I've seen, like at least with Arizona, is this is a game where I think your defensive line has to be able to stand up. I think that the additions they've had in the secondary are very strong, so the linebackers will have to play well. On the other side of the ball, you're going to end up having to see at least just how this Niners defense, they've really retooled up front. I think the Cardinals are more talented on the back end. I think I would pick Arizona here to win this one as well. This one's close for me. And now that leads us to the Seattle Seahawks, and I don't even think I can necessarily pull up their chart from last year because this is a totally different offense from what it was a year ago. The Seahawks last year, they were really a middling team. They weren't what we wanted them to be on offense. They did not have guys healthy on the defensive side of the ball. They were able to essentially kind of have some back and forth games where some games they did really well. Other games, they ended up losing, getting blown out by the Lions. They lost a game to the New York Giants of all teams, lost a game to an injured Niners team for the most part, but were able to win against the Cardinals. And the score was actually, I think, a little bit closer, I think at least, than it looked in terms of only that 16-6 win because of that Kyler Murray interception that was thrown. Up until that point, that turnover kind of is what sunk Arizona. They were able to comfortably win against Arizona later in that season. I think this game at this point was some part of the season. You'll want to see how good is Arizona's offensive line. And you're also looking at the fact that the Seahawks are coming off of a game against the Saints. So Cardinals play the Niners, Seahawks play the Saints. Seahawks are going to get an easier time of it. I think this is one of those spots of where I'd like to give Arizona a win. I think this could be one of those games where the Cardinals start off strong, the Seahawks make a little bit of a comeback for the most part, kind of comes down to a turnover or two. This is one of those big tests where I would love to say the Cardinals are going to start off 4-0, but I've got this game at least as a loss on a short week. I think they'll be a bit beat up coming in, and I could see this coming down to a Seahawks field goal because we've seen some pretty funky games that happened on Thursday Night Football. It wouldn't shock me at least if the Cardinals end up having like a weird out of sorts game where they're normally a decent team and they drop one to the Seahawks. I think they'd have them starting off 3-1. What do you have, Marcos?
Same thing, because of the fact that they have had like 4 games against the Seattle Seahawks just of last year where we could have been in position to be able to win. Their defense really did hold them down to like 16 points, and we still lost that game. And, we had those mistakes going on. I see this as a loss, so I wish I could make this a 4-0 record, but unfortunately, I think this could be the first off of the season.
Yeah, no, I think that's something at least there where it could be a loss. I think if you switched this game with the San Francisco 49ers game and told me that they beat the Seahawks and lose to the Niners, I could completely buy that as well. Let's go and check on with the Tennessee Titans at home. They'll get a little bit of a mini bye after they play the Seahawks, and this is a team that was the worst in the NFL this past season. They ended up trading away a bunch of guys, have a whole new reset. You get Cam Ward early. This was a team that was 31st on offense last year. They didn't really add as many people on offense. Their depth chart right now for the Titans, it's not great. Like, this is very much like the Cam Ward coming into the Titans situation, like Kyler Murray came in to the Cardinals with that season. You got Cam Ward, we got like Tony Pollard. They went out and signed Tyler Lockett to go along with Calvin Ridley after paying Ridley a bunch of money. The defensive side with guys like a Jeffrey Simmons, they did sign Draymond Jones in the offseason. Let's see if he can bounce back. And they've got an interesting older sort of area as far as with Armani Hooker, Xavier Woods being their safeties. It's been a little bit of time since they had one of the better free agent safeties since I believe that they traded him away. This is just not a great roster, I think, overall. This feels like this should be another similar game to the Saints where the Cardinals blow it out, and I've got them starting off 4-1. What do you have, Marcos?
Oh, absolutely. 4-1. I think this is, especially since Cam Ward will be starting this game, this should definitely be a win for the Cardinals. Mostly, I would say, because their defense is they're gonna get going at this point. They're gonna have that momentum on offense. We're gonna know what we are gonna be by this point. So yeah, I think this is a win.
Yeah, so we've got a now game against the fellow division. This is where you get to rejoice about playing the AFC South, the Indianapolis Colts. We don't know who their quarterback is quite going to be. My assumption is early in the season they'll give Anthony Richardson as much as he's able to handle. It seems like with the Colts, I don't know what's going to go on as far as with their ownership. It's too early to talk about some of those things, but they were actually a decent team last year for the most part, with Joe Flacco playing quarterback for a lot of, I think, the season. They ended up with, if I remember correctly, I think it was 2024. Yeah, it was right early on in the season. We got to see some great games that popped up with some interesting, tantalizing talent from Anthony Richardson, and then he got hurt. He held out a game. There was just some back and forth for the most part. They went back to Flacco. The team still went 8-9. Like, they still have talent. This is a team that has Jonathan Taylor has not been a healthy running back the last couple of years, but he's still a star that we've been able to see. They have talent in Michael Pittman Jr. is kind of their main X receiver, a deep threat in Alec Pierce, Josh Downs being their slot guy. They're built pretty well and have Adonai Mitchell. They're going to be running a unique set of concepts, at least with a good, strong run game. The biggest question for them, honestly, is going to be that offensive line. They saw Ryan Kelly move to a different team. They've got a new center in Tanner Bortolini. They have really tried to address the tackle with some young guys, but there's not really any standout players who are there. This is one of the places where on the defensive side of the ball, they got to see a leap from Laitu Latu. They got some guys heading into free agency. DeForest Buckner is always a good threat in the middle. The cornerbacks, where I have some questions. Their corners last year versus this year, they didn't really do a whole lot to really improve the cornerback room for the Colts. Like, if you take a look at least at how it went out with them, their defense was strong despite not having good corners because they had a good starting lineup. But when it comes to who they've got in there, they went and signed Jalen Jones at least to a decent contract. They brought in Shervarius Ward, who had a pretty down year last year. He's a little bit older now. You're hoping that they can take at least a step up if you're a Colts fan, but I feel like this is one of those games where unless Anthony Richardson in year 3 is able to make a huge leap forward in his development process, I think this is a win for the Cardinals because I don't think that they're strong enough on the defensive side to be able to stop a combination of the pass game and run game. And those quarterbacks who they have are prone to make mistakes. I think if the Cardinals were a run bad or run poor defense like they were last year, I think you give the Colts an advantage. This is a game that I have the Cardinals winning, and they would be off to now what is kind of implausibly a pretty decent start. They would have won 6 games to start with and lost only 1. What are your thoughts, Marcos?
Well, the good thing is if they get up that high, they can give themselves a cushion and be in like a 2021 stand situation where, we lost the games towards the end of the season. We still made the playoffs. So I see it as a win. I definitely agree with you. I don't see anything. It's crazy because their defense was actually top 10. Didn't really feel that way. It didn't really even seem that way. But at this point, the Cardinals defense and their defensive line needs to basically feast because you have no idea who's going to be a quarterback. And if it's Anthony Richardson, going up against the Cardinals, we would have a situation where a rookie that looked like, or not a rookie, a young guy that looked like was kind of turned away, actually turns it on for that game. So that's the only thing that scares me, but I think this is a win.
Yeah, I think that's good. The only game, at least, that Daniel Jones has won against the Cardinals in his career was against that Josh Dobbs game where Josh Dobbs had that 23-yard run, and the Cardinals defense got off to a really big start. Like, they were up, I think, 20-0 at the end of the first half, and as we remember in the second half of that game, that was where they started making some deep plays to Jalen Hyatt, some plays over the middle, and the Giants just came back in that game for the most part. It was just Cardinals were not able to stop anyone. I think that this would be a different time where I think that they, whatever it is, Jones or Richardson, I think that defensive line is going to be a problem for them. Now we're going to have the Green Bay Packers, and this is one that I would love to be able to say, hey, if you could trade a loss to the Titans or the Colts for a win against the Packers, would you trade that? Because I got them losing this game here, but I don't think it's a blowout loss. And I think that's the step forward is it's on the road. I don't think it's a blowout loss. I think that the Packers defense, how they've got that offense run up, this is a team that I think potentially could fall off if things don't go as well for their protection and Jordan Love. I just don't like to bet against Matt LaFleur and how they have things structured. They've got another offense that's been built in who can be a wide receiver one in Matthew Golden. I think this is one of those games where we'll talk about this as a game the Cardinals had an opportunity to win and let it slip away at home. But it wouldn't shock me if they drop a game such as the Colts on the road because they're looking ahead to the Packers game or even looking ahead to the bye week, Marcos. Do you have this as a win or a loss for Arizona?
Unfortunately, I see this as a loss mostly because we did get we got hammered a year ago against the Green Bay Packers. So they are a playoff contending team. They are a very good team. They're in a very good division, so they're very tough to beat. And so unfortunately, I see this as a loss.
Yeah, moving on now, we've got the bye week and then the Dallas Cowboys. We both talked a bit about the Cowboys and Kyler Murray. This is going to be a unique test for the Cardinals because there's a decent pass rush in Dallas. They really have needed to get their run stuffers up front to be a little bit better, which is kind of interesting. The Cowboys a year ago really struggled because they didn't have a healthy Dak Prescott throughout the majority of the season. When they did, they were pretty good. They just did not have a number 2 threat. They finally have that in Pickens, and we're going to see exactly what he's able to do. But this is one of those spots of, like you said, for some reason, Cardinals have been able to just beat the Cowboys. I could see that happening differently this year at home, where this could be maybe the first loss of Kyler's career. But what we're also talking about is a Cowboys team that lost Tyron Smith, got a replacement for him, lost Zach Martin to retirement, lost, I think, one of the other players, and they just slotted a rookie in Tyler Booker in. They really didn't address the running back room like we thought they were going to, as far as for what we saw last year was they kind of had to throw the ball to CeeDee Lamb to win. They didn't have enough options. This past year, they really, I think, have made a couple of splashy moves, but I don't feel like this Cowboys roster has made the same strides that the Cardinals roster has. We just have not played well against Dak Prescott for the most part throughout most of our history. What we have seen, though, is when the Cardinals can run the ball, we've been able to beat the Cowboys. I think that that's going to continue. I could see this being a win. I also think you take a look at the way the rest of the schedule plays out. The Dallas Cowboys are going to be playing the Denver Broncos with that defense and a Sean Payton offense. They're going to get them on the road the week before. Arizona, sipping Mai Tais the week before on a bye week. I think they'll be rested and refreshed. I think that this is one of those cases where if you look at the bye week for Arizona last year, that was where we saw the Cardinals have issues, unfortunately. Do you think that those bye week blues continue, Marcos, or do you have them with a win against the Cowboys?
No, I think for the first time, the bye week is just not going to affect us very badly against the Cowboys because we seem to have their number and we're playing them over in Dallas. I'm not going to count that out when you have Kyler Murray as the quarterback and they're playing in the Dallas Cowboys, their stadium.
Yep, so we have that as a win. Now they have another game against the Seattle Seahawks. We've talked about the Seahawks already. I think this is one of the cases where they could split. This is one of the places where, as far as losses go, and we've got the Cardinals having a pretty soft opening to their schedule. There are times where things can get a little bit funky. I think with that win that they're going to have, at least against and also I forgot that the Cowboys go on the bye week following Arizona immediately afterwards. The Seahawks are going to be at the Washington Commanders on the road before they go back home to play Arizona. There are going to be teams that are in the thick of it. This is a strong NFC West division this year. Giants accepted, of course, are the exception. I think that this is a spot where, depending on how the Sam Darnold experience work out or doesn't work out, I really respect Mike Macdonald on the defensive side of the ball, and I think that it's really hard to beat a team 2 times during the season. It's even harder to beat them 3 times in the season, which we can talk about with the Niners. I think that this could be the first year in a while that they sweep Seattle, and part of that is because I think you look at Sam Darnold in a new environment outside of what we saw with all of that talent and Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota. I just don't have that same faith here. I've got the Cardinals winning the game here, and for those of you wondering, well, when are you going to pick them to lose? Trust us. There's plenty of losses that we can talk about here in the second half of the season. Marcos, Cardinals, Seahawks, who do you have?
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you. I think this is gonna be a split. I just go with the notion that by this time, if they follow what we've been saying about the wins and losses, they're gonna have momentum on their side. So I believe that this is definitely gonna be a win for the Cardinals.
Yeah, I could see that being the case. It'll really depend on Kyler Murray against that passing on the pass rush. I think the biggest difference for me is I think that with the Seahawks offensive line as it is, Cardinals offensive line as it is, and those defensive lines, I'll trust Kyler a little bit more because we've seen when he's under pressure, Sam Darnold has had some issues. He did well last year, but I don't know if that's that same step forward. I've got this game against the Niners as a loss because I think it's going to be hard for them to be able to beat San Francisco twice like they did last year. And some games come down to being pretty close. This is going to be a home game. I actually have the Cardinals winning at San Francisco, but I have the Niners coming in here. I think that maybe for some reason there's something that pops up with playing a brutal Seahawks defensive line the week before. I think that there's a chance they could just come out flat and the Niners could seek revenge for losing at home in the season. I think this is a loss for Arizona. I like it to be another win, but I think also realistically, it's really hard to be able to look at a team that's starting out 9-2 to be able to begin the season. If they can do that, great. But being able to get to 9 wins at this point of the season, I think recognizing that the National Football League is a pro league and how division games just mean that much more, it wouldn't shock me if we'd like to see them go out and be able to beat up on the Seahawks, beat up on the Niners, and then see if they could steal one from the Rams, or maybe we went 4-2 in the division. It's okay if we lost to the Rams. I just don't think that's reasonable. We always can see a team that is either expected to be there that can kind of go in and clean up, and I think it's tough to say that they will go 2-0 in that divisional stretch, Marcos.
Yeah, same here. It's a very difficult, not only for that, but there's always going to be a shocker game. And who else is going to be the better to pull off that shocker than San Francisco? If they have everybody healthy, they're very I'm not saying prominent team, but they're a team that you just can't really count out, even if they're at the bottom of the division. And it's very expected that the San Francisco 49ers could be at the bottom of the division, but there's times where they should have been at the bottom and they're not. So we're going to learn a lot from what this team is going to be at this point, but I do see that as a loss, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think that could be one of those games where if you win that game and all of a sudden you're starting to talk about the Cardinals in similar regard to one of those teams that didn't make the playoffs last year, it's turning around and contending for possibly their division lead, because at that point, if they're able to go 3-1 against the Niners, the Seahawks, I should say, before you played the Rams, that's already got you in a great position. Another game that you'll see following up at home is the Jacksonville Jaguars. This is going to be a team that last year things just fell apart. Like Trevor Lawrence had to be replaced with Mac Jones because of health reasons. The offense was not consistent. They had Brian Thomas Jr. was a nice bright spot, but they really needed a lot of retooling. They picked 5th overall, traded up to 2nd overall, giving up a future draft pick for Travis Hunter, who's going to play a lot at wide receiver, some at cornerback. This is one of those games that I think what we can talk about is you're probably looking at this game and the Buccaneers game as you're gonna probably say, can you win 2 out of the 3 against the Niners, the Jaguars, the Buccaneers? If you start to trend down where you're struggling, the Jaguars defense gets you there. They make a couple of plays in offense. Kyler, maybe there's a turnover or someone fumbles early, depending on how health goes. This is one of those teams where you could say is easy trap game. You're at home. You just played the Niners. You don't want to drop this game before you go on to play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think that this is one of those games where you can squeak out a win against the Jaguars, because I just don't think that the offensive line and everything is set up correctly as is. Maybe it ends up being a cool showdown with Travis Hunter on one side, Marv on the other. I think that the biggest thing you want to watch for in this game is the Jaguars' rushing attack. Liam Cohen was able to do a ton with the Buccaneers' offense last year, and he's got some weapons this year. I just don't think he has the same offensive line that he had in Tampa Bay, and we still yet to see if Baker Mayfield, he made that jump. Can Trevor Lawrence make that same jump? While at the same time, Kyler Murray, I think one of these two quarterbacks is going to be in the process of making the jump. Marcos, do you have this as a win or a loss against the Jacksonville Jaguars?
I see this as a win, just simply because this team, we really don't know what this team has, and I know that Liam Cohen is a coach that really did well, not only his first year as offensive coordinator, but he did so good that they offered him a job, and they fired their general manager just to make sure that they can land this guy. So it takes a while for offenses to kind of have that mesh that they need to, or that to have what the offensive coordinator is trying to do be portrayed through the offense. So, I see this as a win for the Cardinals.
Yeah, moving on at least to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I've got this one as a unique game because Baker Mayfield, he's had kind of a career revitalization. Buccaneers so far seem to have a lot of talent. They just have not been able to really capitalize on that in the postseason more than first 1 week. They've got some more competition from the Falcons. The Panthers are taking a step up. The Saints are seemingly going to be pretty down. I think the Buccaneers could have a worse season overall, but this is going to be a 10 a.m. game against the Buccaneers on the East Coast. This is one of those games where, as long as you're able to show up, I think this could be one of those natural games where you just maybe lay an egg on the East Coast. The offense was so good last year, was top 5. They lost Liam Cohen. We'll see how Josh Grizzard does. I think that their defense will probably be about the same, and the offense takes a small step back for Tampa Bay this season. Good news, at least, is Emeka Egbuka, adding him to that as the wide receiver 3 for a Buccaneers team that's already pretty loaded. I think that's going to be really interesting to see that defensive line match up with Arizona, because they've got Jalen McMillan as a draft pick. They've got Chris Godwin, who's going to be potentially back from injury. He's a great receiver. Mike Evans just seems to be kind of like Larry Fitzgerald. Father Time has just not been stopping him thus far. And they added kind of the heir apparent to him in Egbuka for this is just a good overall team. Bucky Irving was one of the top running backs last year. Still have a good offensive line. I think this is a loss for the Cardinals, Marcos, and I think that we're going to look at this as the start of what could be a little bit of a downward stretch for Arizona.
Yeah, I see the whole schedule up to this point. I've seen it the same exact way as you are. Yeah, I see this as a loss for them. They're at the playoff team. Yes, Baker Mayfield is their quarterback, and we have his number, but this is a different team. It's going to be led by another offensive coordinator, so that's kind of sad for Baker Mayfield, but they still have the pieces in place. So, like, as I keep mentioning, I think this is going to be a loss for those reasons.
Coming up next is the Los Angeles Rams, and this is a team that we've been very, very familiar with in our time, at least after all. Last year they finished 10-7, were able to win the division. This year, as far as for how it's looking for their team, they look like they've got that same defense that came on pretty strong last year. They're going to be going up at least against the Cardinals at a time coming off of, let me take a look here at that schedule. They're going to be coming off I think it's another home game previously there it is. Yeah, they're going to be coming off a home game, road game at Carolina. So they're going to get the Buccaneers and then the Carolina Panthers. We'll see how the Panthers are at that point during the season. Rams were not a surefire thing last year, but part of that was Cooper Kupp's injury. He's in Seattle now. I think there's a lot to be determined there with him as far as how it goes. I know he's been a Cardinal killer in the past. This is one of those places of where it's really going to depend on Matthew Stafford's health. Like, they've got pieces at least on the line. The tackle is going to be a bit of a question mark. They were able to trade back for the most part and be able to still get one of the guys that they liked in the draft this year in, I want to say, Terrence Ferguson. They needed a tight end badly. But I'm not overall impressed with how they basically just added a tight end and said, we're good to go on offense between that and Devontae Adams. If they're right, this could be just another, all right, Rams cruise through the NFC West season. This is one of those games where your defensive line has to get pressure, and Kyler's going to have to be able to perform and produce. I'm just curious, Marcos, do you think that this Cardinals team at this point during the season, are they still going to be as strong? Are they going to be starting to fade? Because this is where the challenge begins.
Yeah, absolutely. I see this as a win only because I think the defense is going to carry this team throughout the season. I think this is going to be a defensive slugfest between the Cardinals. Obviously, the Rams added some pieces, and they ended up really actually drafting really well for their defense to be able to recuperate for what they lost again with Aaron Donald out the window. But quarterback's still a question mark with them. Linebackers kind of still a question mark for them. Really, the only position you can ever see them exceeding in is edge defenders and defensive tackles. So this is going to be a slugfest, and I think we're just going to win this one. It's going to be a low-scoring game, but we're going to pull it off.
Yeah, I've got this one at least here for Arizona, as I'd love to be able to have it be a win where they could take that step forward. I've got this as a loss. I've got it followed up at least with Arizona going to the Houston Texans, and the Texans are unique because it's another playoff team. If we take a look at where they were last year with the Texans, they were really interesting. The Texans are a team that didn't really do a whole lot to be able to help on their offensive side of the ball besides adding a couple of new receivers. Their offense was middle of the pack. The defense was actually top 10. It's a tough match to be able to go on the road to the Texans. This is one of those places where this is where your defensive line needs to step up. They've played C.J. Stroud tough in the past. They got the 3 interceptions on him. I think that the Texans, if that offensive line doesn't kind of pick up with the receivers they've been added, I still think they might be good, but it wouldn't shock me if they're one of those teams that just has a down year once in a while. That wouldn't shock me for the most part, but I think this is a game that they can win. I've got the Texans winning this game against the Cardinals.
Yeah, I'm on the same. I'm on the same boat here. I think Houston's going to win against the Cardinals, mostly because of C.J. Stroud, and he's going to be in his 3rd year, even though he had kind of like a back season, or like he took a step back last season, mostly because of the offensive line just not holding up. But he's in his 3rd year. They have gotten some pieces to be able to improve on, and they were like a playoff team. So I think they're going to take the win here.
Yeah, moving on now to the last home game of the season with the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons were a pretty good team offensively down the stretch. The biggest gap and question mark that we'll have, at least for them, is they overall were 2nd overall in PFF on offense. Like, they were very efficient, did super well on offense. They were 8-9. Their defense was middle of the pack. They were in contention down the stretch to the end of the year, but they had to move on from Kirk Cousins to do it. They won a couple of clutch games, but their last game they did drop in the season to the Panthers. Their defense needed help. It needed edge rushers and more. This is really going to be coming down to, I think, it's Kyler Murray versus Michael Penix. We've seen in the past, Kyler's been able to beat up the Falcons for the most part. I think in this sort of a game, it being at home, I would give the edge to Arizona, so I've got this as a win for them.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, same here. I see this as a win because of Michael Penix being the 2nd year. He kind of shows tendencies of being like a I forgot what the term was, a gunslinger on offense. He makes some crazy, incredible throws, but he also doesn't take care of the ball well, and he gets a little bit he just doesn't take care of the ball as well as we think he's going to be. So I think this is going to be like a Will Levis situation where you saw some promise, and the 2nd year it kind of you see like, okay, that's where his shortcomings are coming from. So I think, like I said, this is going to be a win for the Cardinals.
Yeah, I think we're going to be talking about Michael Penix as a star who's coming in as the Falcons are kind of pushing the Buccaneers for the division, or we're going to be talking about it where this is a defensive line game where the Cardinals' offensive line is able to run the ball effectively and be able to beat the Falcons, who on their offensive line with Michael Penix, he's had a couple ACLs. His movement skills may not be the best, but he's still got a heck of an arm. I would, like you said, I'm just going to go ahead and say that this is one of those games where I think the Cardinals win, and then that leads to Cincinnati Bengals. This is on the road. This is the Bengals team that you're also going to be playing. We don't know the time. It could be a morning game, could be on Saturday. I think this is one of those places where I take a look at who are good closers as far as they just win games down the stretch. Bengals last year won games down the stretch, probably should have been more dangerous or gotten into the postseason. They just didn't get off to a good enough start to be able to finish. But let me go ahead and I'll see. I'm trying to take a look and see if I can look at the splits. If I can pull those for you guys, I will. But the Bengals' schedule last year, if you're taking a look at how well they finished, let me go ahead and pull that up, at least for those of you guys watching. This is the 2025 schedule, excuse me. The Bengals will be coming off a game against the Dolphins, who, depending on the status of Tua's health, the Dolphins are going to be playing them an interesting time. But you take a look at that late game schedule. After they lost to the Steelers by basically 6 points, like basically a touchdown, he threw for 309. Just that offense was just humming. They won their last 5 games of the season to get to 9-8. So they started off. You want to try to get the Bengals if you can early because they're great closers. I got this as a loss for the Cardinals, Marcos.
Same here. I got this as a loss, unfortunately. The Cincinnati Bengals are they're going to be the Bengals for maybe the entirety of Joe Burrow's being the quarterback. Um, it just doesn't seem like a very good matchup on paper for the Cardinals. If they are contending for like a playoff spot, I think the Cincinnati Bengals are just unfortunately going to beat the Cardinals, and it's going to be that late season. Okay, now we're going to go into the Los Angeles game, the end of the year game against Los Angeles. We're going to have that come down to the wire.
Yeah, Bengals go and drafted Shamar Stewart, I should say. They're still having to figure out contract stuff with Trey Hendrickson, who's been one of the best sack artists in the NFL. I think that the defense is suspect enough here, where if the Cardinals' defense can be elite in being able to stop some of these guys, that's where I think you have your best chance. I think that would need the Cardinals to take a leap that we haven't seen from them just yet. I'll be more comfortable projecting this as a win probably when I can see some of these late half games come around. I think if you're able to, and let's say this is very interesting too. At this point, Marcos, I have the Cardinals losing to the Cincinnati Bengals, and at this point, I now have them at not at a record of 9.
Like, we have similar records.
2, 3, 4, 5. I got them at 9-6 now. Oh, no, not 9-6. Sorry, excuse me. It's be 9-7 at this point. 9-7 going into their last game against. I think it was. Oh, sorry, I miscounted the Falcons game. I've got them at 10-6 right now, Marcos. After the Bengals game, I got them going and losing against the Rams this final week. I think that being able to play the Rams on the road, I think that there's 2 reasons for this. One is, I think that if you're able to beat the Rams in that first stretch of the season, you're already at 11 wins, and you've already beaten the Rams. Unless the Rams are going to be either blowing teams away for the most part with their schedule, they're getting a first-place schedule. I think that the other teams in the NFC West are going to at least be able to put up a fight like they did last year. We saw that the Niners were able to knock off the Rams despite it not being the best season from San Francisco. I think if you can beat the Rams early on in the season, you'll get yourself to 11 wins. You may already have the division locked up if you're able to knock off the Rams and clean up some of those other teams, where you could just say, hey, we're going to put in some backups. This is going to be a game we're going to hand off the ball to our veteran quarterback at least to is able to take that on there, and it would be a loss for the most part because the game doesn't mean anything. But you have to beat the Rams the first time you play them and do well against the NFC West to be able to make that a factor. I think the other factor for this is it's just, as far as we know with Arizona, they've struggled. They've had a hard time closing down the stretch. I think that this could be a loss that I have. So I've got them finishing overall at 10-7 on the season. I'll say this, though. If they can steal a game against one of the Bengals or Rams here, then you're at 11-7. You should be then in the playoffs pretty comfortably is what you should be, because we know you can miss the playoffs with 10 wins. But with the added 7th seed, we've hardly ever seen it where teams have gone in and had a 10 or 11 win season and then missed out on the playoffs. It may be rough this year because of the Lions, the Bears, all these teams stepping up. I think that in order to make the playoffs for sure, you probably want to get to that 11th win or get to 10 wins, and then depending on how things have fallen in the NFC, that's what could get you into the playoffs. What are your thoughts, Marcos?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with the 10, I believe with the 10-win record, you're going to have the Cardinals at least make it to the playoffs. I have them going into the playoffs, but I have them also losing against the Rams at the season closer. If this is for the division, unfortunately, I don't think the Cardinals are going to run away with this, especially if they're playing at Los Angeles. It would be awesome to be in that situation where the Cardinals win this game, just so that we can basically take the division and then have like a possibly maybe you fight for like the first seed, but I don't think it's very likely. But at least having home field advantage for the first couple of weeks.
No, I agree, and I think how Arizona's line will be healthy is a big thing at this point. We've seen that they've got depth on the defensive line now. Heck, they've got depth. They haven't as much depth on the offensive line at the tackle spot, and we still are looking to see who that wide receiver 2 could be. I think if you get off to a hot start, that would be the place where you look for a team that's looking to trade away another receiver, bring that guy in, and I think then that could help you compete maybe in some of these games down the stretch on the offensive side. This is one of those places where I think, Marcos, what it's really going to depend on is, do the Niners get back to normal and you're not able to beat the Niners? Does the Seahawks experiment on offense actually work, or is that defense just good enough that Kyler Murray struggles? And the Rams are always going to be the Rams. I think if your goal is that you can split with them this season, we've got them, I believe, losing twice. I've got them losing twice to the Rams. You've got them winning once, actually, against the Rams. What's your final record prediction for the Cardinals this season? Is that 11-6 for you?
I believe it'll either be 11-6 or 10-7. I think it would be closer to 10-7, but 11-6, I do see them as a playoff team. I do have high hopes for them, and I think the defense is definitely going to take a step forward and push this team to the playoffs finally.
Yeah, I've got them, and this is where I think their ceiling, like you said, could be a 12-win team if, this is only if, they're able to kind of beat up on some of these teams for the most part later in the stretch where they are able to go on a roll with their defense. The offense is able to run the ball effectively, and you see them be able to do well in the NFC West if they split with the Seahawks. If they see the Niners return to form, they split with the Niners, and they lose twice to the Rams, they go 2-4 in the division. You're probably finishing at an 8-9 or a 9-8, and you'd probably be finishing outside of the playoffs at that point. If that's the case, Marcos, I think that is their floor. If the floor goes lower than that, let's say the floor goes lower than that, they have either more injuries, it's more struggling, the defense as well, maybe Kyler misses some time, like whatever you want to call about it for their floor. I think the defense is good enough that floor, it's not going to hit as low as the 2023 Cardinals did, getting a top 4 pick. I think that it's going to end up putting them at least in spot where they'll be able to capitalize and be able to have at their floor probably about 6 or 7 wins, maybe in 7-win season like there for the Colts. If that's the case, we're probably going to be looking at the offense as being a culprit, or that the defense has really seen a lot of injuries because, like we said, the depth and the talent has been tremendously improved this season. So I think that the floor of it being 6 and 7 wins, I don't think it's going to be much lower than that. I've been wrong before. Ceiling, like we've said, is your hope for 11 and 12. I think we've got them probably comfortably in the middle at 10 wins being the expectation. If they go 9-8, what do you have, Marcos? Because I think an 8-9 season, you see that 2 years in a row. What do you have for that? You're probably going to be looking at figuring out, do you need to restart, refresh, get some additional help on the offensive side of the ball? How does the quarterback play go? Is this a career year for Kyler Murray, but they turn it over a few times? Like, what are some of your thoughts for how some of these outcomes could go? Because I think if we're looking at them, the issue isn't if they have a 6 or 7 win season where you're like, all right, you're probably going to be in position where maybe there's a couple quarterbacks, you trade up, get a guy on a rookie deal, move a Kyler out. Maybe you say, hey, we just got some bad luck this year. Add some players on the offense. You know, that would be one of the options you could see depending on how it's treated. If you end up going and having an 11 or 12 win season, I think that's the goal. And that at this point isn't maybe the expectation. But I think what we could say is you checked all your boxes. You did what you're supposed to do. The 9-8 sort of a season where you missed the playoffs, to me, that's tough. That's tough to know what you're going to do. What would you say, at least, if the Cardinals end up in that scenario?
Well, if they end up in that scenario, I think Jonathan Gannon's seat is going to be a little bit hot, or at the very least, they might think about moving on, depending on how Kyler Murray, plays out the season. If he plays out really well, we're going to obviously retain him. But if it's a season where he's looking mediocre to below average, then we might start talking about maybe moving on from Kyler Murray and seeing if we can either trade up in the draft or trade for or sign somebody during free agency. Not sure what the market's going to look like, but we know good quarterbacks don't usually hit the market. So it'd be like a trade situation for the Cardinals. That's what I see. If it's below that, it's a definite, like Jonathan Gannon, thank you. Monty Ossenfort would definitely be the general manager continuing forward, but Jonathan Gannon would probably be out the door, especially if that defense looks horrendous and it leads to the season being as bad as it is. But I think you're right about, I think that would be an injury-riddled season where the Cardinals, if they don't have all their starters going into this year, I don't think they go any lower than 9 wins.
Yeah, and I have a hard time seeing that with Gannon. He's gotten a lot out of the players. They play hard for them. We've seen the team turn around. I think the issue, like we're talking about, is you've had a above-average defense this year without above-average talent. You're at the talent spot now. You've invested a lot into that offense. You haven't really invested that much this season. Now, maybe they do want to add another piece or two, maybe add that mid-season. This is Kyler Murray's year. You have now not had a defense for the last couple of seasons. They got more out of it last year where the defense was the strength of the team when we thought the offense was going to carry. Now it's time for the offense and defense to kind of come together to be able to have what should be a great squad. And if you end up with 8 wins or less, that's where I think you take a look at the quarterback and say, are we able to win with this guy? Or even are we comfortable to say, we're going to continue to have him as our quarterback in the future, knowing we can continue to add to the talent. He's on a cost-controlled contract, come back in, and maybe things will end up working out a bit better in 2026. What I can at least say is it feels like you don't usually get that much time in the NFL. We haven't seen Monty or Jonathan Gannon go out and move on from Kyler Murray as many suggested. Feels like this is a big year for him. I think it's also a big year for Drew Petzing. He had an interview with the Bears, which reports said didn't go as well for the most part. If you come into this year and the defense is, again, the strength of the team, the offense, they run the ball, they're an effective running team, but if the passing offense doesn't develop, if Kyler fades down the stretch, that's going to be a question of being able to know on the coaching staff, is this where the quarterback is just not being there? Do the injuries play a factor for the most part? I don't think you can have as many excuses at this point. I think that you would probably need to start making that move or prepping to make that move for 2026 or at the latest, Lord forbid, 2027 if you're the Cardinals. But we're predicting a little bit more of an optimistic result for Arizona this year. The reboot of the Cardinals, we're hoping it's complete and that they're able to capitalize with a 10-win season. Hopefully more, and if not, then that's going to be really interesting to see what they do in the offseason. Thank you guys again for tuning in so much. I know we're a little bit late on our schedule release and predictions for the most part. Just had a lot of life stuff going on. I know some of you saw my mom has been in the hospital the last few days. We're expecting her to get out either tomorrow or over the weekend. Thank you guys at least for all of the thoughts and prayers you sent along. She reads all of those comments, so appreciate that. Marcos, anything that you've got before we take off for tonight?
Well, just like I predicted that this team is going to make it to the playoffs because of the roster. There's definitely no more excuses when it comes to the Cardinals. So I'm looking at the schedule, and I think if we start out strong, we can fade out during the end of the season. But if we finish strong, then that'll be the Cardinal first, and hopefully we can make it into the playoffs and have a couple wins.
Yeah, I'd love to be able to say that this is an 11-win team. Just looking at the defense, you added all these pieces. I just feel like a lot of it comes down to you don't really know until you get into the season and see how the season plays out. I do tend to agree with you that this expectation should be a 10 or 11 win team. Hopefully they can turn it in and have a magical season, one that we haven't gotten in too many years here in the desert as Cardinals fans. That will be it for us here today on the Redbird Reboot podcast. We'll probably have some time off now coming up forward for the most part. Come in with a little bit of a conversation or two, probably some film studies I know Marcos has been wanting to dig into. Another solo show or interview, at least, that I'll probably bring along with. But yeah, it's that time of year where there's plenty that still goes on in the NFL. We'll be ready if there's an emergency podcast that we need. But for the most part, this is the time at least just to be able to take a step back, be able to get some rest, and then be ready for training camp, because that's just a couple of months away for the most part. OTAs are just about to start this upcoming week. Marcos, if you want to shout out one more time where our viewers and listeners of the podcast can find you.
At the Redbird Reboot on YouTube, you see the QR code, obviously. If you don't see it, then you'll see it sometime during the stream. And of course, at Pancake Soul, you can go ahead and just follow me, ask me questions and whatnot. And like I said, you can find me here, obviously.
Yep, I'm like Murphy said. And thank you guys again for tuning in. Go Cardinals. This has been the Redbird Reboot podcast. We've just rebooted you guys. Time for us to log off. Have a good night, everyone.